So I don't want to spoil anything, but I grew up in the Robert Taylor homes, but I had an aunt who had a house in Roseland, and so until I was about 12 or 13, I spent a lot of weekends in Roseland, running around with my boy cousins and my brother, and so to this day there are scars on my legs from like, you know, running through alleys and playing it and all that. So I'm going to read from the chapter that's actually set in Roseland. My aunt, her house was on 105th and LaSalle, which is not super far from where Rose Cafe's proposed like site will be. I'm not going to read like the juicy stuff that happens in this chapter because I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just say that some crazy things just went down. And both Fifi, who is our narrator, and her brother, they both happened to come back into their aunt's house all beat up. When Auntie Nora saw me with my jaw and lip all puffed up, clothes dirty and disheveled, and scratches on my arms from the concrete, she leapt from her sofa and squealed, "Fish, baby, who did this to you?" The concern and care melted my facade, and the tears gushed. I couldn't get the answer out. She scowled at her son and asked him the question. These girls she was jumping rope with, he said, hunching his shoulders. While Auntie Nora patched me up, Michi stumbled through the door, his friend holding him up. He was in worse shape. I thought my aunt was going to faint. "Oh my God, Tim!" Her voice seemed to fill the entire house then, and Uncle Tim appeared ready to fight. He saw me and Michi, and then he understood the panic in her voice. I had skinned knees and my side hurt, but my brother's right eye was swollen shut, his nose slanted a little, and he was holding his side. What bothered me most though, his Raiders cap was on his head, twisted to the right. It seemed like a hat would be the first thing you'd lose if you got jumped. Auntie Nora drove us to the hospital and Uncle Tim rushed back to the building to get Mama. Once we were all at the hospital together, Mama went to Michi's room and I stayed back in the waiting room with my aunt, uncle, and cousin. "Why weren't you two together?" Auntie Nora asked her son. "He didn't want to play the game with us," he told her. And it was true. Michi wasn't really into video games. "Why didn't you stay with him?" Auntie Nora asked. TJ looked at his shoes. Uncle Tim rescued him and said, "Michi was probably on Perry with Manny." TJ didn't say anything, just stared back at him, not giving Michi up. I didn't know what Perry Street or Manny meant, but it seemed to answer something for them all. "Did they jump Manny?" Auntie Nora asked. "No," Uncle Tim said. TJ's face wanted to say so much, but even though he and Michi weren't tight, no one wanted to be called a snitch. Mama appeared in the waiting room and told us that we could come see him. Michi sat up on a thin bed, his chest bandaged, nose wrapped, and eyes still closed and purple. We just looked at him like a creature we didn't know. Only Mama and Auntie Nora dared to touch him and throw sympathetic looks his way. Uncle Tim and TJ kept some distance, just nodding at him, barely laughing at Auntie Nora's jokes about how he looked like a mummy. When she said Michi could stay at her house and heal over the summer, believing it was an isolated incident, that her house was still safer than our building, Uncle Tim cut in and said, "No, he needs to go home." We all snapped our heads in his direction, but he still looked at Michi. When Auntie Nora said, "Timothy," he only moved his eyes in her direction. Before she could assert herself, Uncle Tim seemed to communicate something with his clenched jaw and the stern expression on his face. She looked over her sister with an apology, and Mama said, "I'll take him home." Just like that, Uncle Tim had cast Michi out, and we'd taken sides, every household squaring up. Auntie Nora not sure what her husband knew, but trusting his decision. The quiet tension in the room made the beeping machines and TV show playing over our heads seem way too loud. "He needs to go home." That's what Uncle Tim said. I needed to go home too. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
what made you pick that part? Just because it was in Roseland?
Yeah, it's if I like read the entire like or even like a fourth of the chapter, it would have been so long. But when you actually read the book or listen to the book, you'll get the setup of like what Fifi's interpretation of like, you know, when you live in a housing project, you don't have a yard that's your own. You don't have like a lovely house that's painted a specific color. And so she kind of talks about her perspective of like what it's like to go over to her aunt's house. Hi, Aisha. To go over to her aunt's house and just kind of the setup of like all the things that happens when she gets over to her aunt's house in Roseland, but things just kind of go awry. So you guys got to hear the aftermath, but it's a chapter that you really want to read.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Or oh, you weren't. We can't hear you.
There you are. I think it changed.
There we go.
I'm good, y'all.
You're good.
Yes.
Becca, don't start
Hi.
recording just yet. Well, you know how to edit it before the right parts, right? Hey,
Hi.
I just want to tell her.
Just moving forward from like going along with the conversation. So you mentioned that this is not autobiographical, and I'm wondering like why you chose to do that, and like if any of the parts of it like were specific stories from your life.
Yeah, so I am a fiction writer, and fiction writers love to like steal things. We mine things from our real lives, but then we get to make up a lot of other things. And what I can say is like most of the places in this book are places that I've experienced. And that's probably why it feels so like, you know, autobiographical. I also know what it was like to be a little Black girl growing up in certain pockets of the South Side in the 80s and 90s. And so I just, you know, it's not, this isn't my specific story, but I just think there are a lot of places that are so familiar to me, and I really want to lay them down and have like these spots on the South Side like cemented in literature, like places I can't go pick up a book and read about, especially from like a Black girl's perspective. And so I'm happy to be able to like write about Roseland and to write about Robert Taylor and what it's like for little Black kids to go downtown.
So Toya, I don't know, I should introduce myself a little bit. My name is Aisha Malone. I am the owner and co-founder of Rose Café. I don't know how much Rebecca had told you, but you know, my kids just had a championship basketball game that kind of lingered into some emotional things with the boys. So I had to be there for that. So I do apologize for being late.
It's okay.
But just to piggyback off what you are saying, that I do understand about how important it is for kids to have representation in their neighborhood. And so that's kind of like one of the reasons why we started Rose Café, just to make sure that we can give that space to kids in the 60628 area code. Because if you walk around this neighborhood, it is a book desert. Amongst other things that we are lacking, but one thing that we want to try to be transformational with is like access to literacy. So we ran with that idea, and we are getting a lot of support, and we are so grateful to have you to talk to us today.
Thank you. No, this is wonderful. I love what you're doing. I also love your logo, but we can talk about that later.
Okay. So a little about what we do when we do Author Talks. We like to highlight Black and Brown minority writers in the city of Chicago, because it's great to make sure that people know that we got a lot going on and we have authors as well. And I think I'm trying to bring down my anxiety, but have you started asking questions, Rebecca?
Yeah, we just got started. So we talked about Rose Cafe, and she read the section about Roseland, and so yeah, we're just ready to go.
A little bit.
So why do you do us like that? So why you do us like that, Toya? Why Roseland come like that? What's going on?
Listen, you know what's funny? I was hanging out in Roseland at a time when you didn't hear gunshots. Like we played in the street and you knew your neighbors, and like I know what Roseland is like kind of trying to come out of right now, but I have fond memories of like my aunt was the first person I experienced who like owned her own house. And I was growing up in a housing project where no one owned anything. And so when I think back, and my aunt has passed away since then. So I think back on my days in Roseland, and it was a time of like joy and wonder. And by the time I hit 13, my mom was like, no, you can't, you're not gonna be running around with these boys. Like, you can't go over there unless it's a holiday and I'm there. But there was just a season, probably from like when I was 5 until like 13, that I spent major holidays and like maybe every other weekend in Roseland. So I'm just glad that like I could write about it during a time when like there were houses and people were hanging out. Now people were acting up in this scene, you know, they got a little raucous, but but that's kind of like, that's not entirely how I remember like those days in Roseland.
So when you think back, so when I was reading the book, how is thinking just about the neighborhood of Robert Taylor and Rose, and what similarities, like, but I know you say one of the biggest differences, there were homeowners over here. What other things that we like have in common, and like what are some that you knew was different? Like, okay, I'm here, I'm on the low end, but now I'm in Rose.
Yeah, so I think like this sense of family and extended family coming together, especially like in the summertime. Because until like Robert Taylor got really crazy, people would bring their cousins would come visit, you know? So this sense of like, and summertime shy is summertime shy. So like you and your cutest outfits and like, you know, everybody's like outside and listening to the same music and listening to like local rap artists. Like I think about folks like Do or Die, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Twister, like all those kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like you would leave Robert Taylor and go to Roseland. We were listening to the same music. We were doing the same dances. We knew the West Side Percolator and the South Side Percolator. Like they're just like, there was that common ground. And I think the things that were different is that I feel like the rules were different. When I was back home, you had to be careful, you had to be alert. Like if you heard shooting, you knew what to do. And I just don't remember having that kind of like wartime mentality when I was in Roseland. Like you came and went, and you didn't have that sort of like fear. And I don't know, you kind of knew and trusted everybody. Like you knew who lived in all the houses, and that's why I actually like this sort of fight that breaks out. These girls don't know Fifi, and they're like some random cousins who happen to be, you know, in town for the weekend, and then things kind of popped off. But I just kind of feel like everybody knew everybody. You knew who drove which cars, you knew who was home. Like it just, I think that definitely is something you have in common. Like they were these sort of Black villages. And then, you know, as time passed, like things started to deteriorate. And then we started to call Roseland the Wild Hundreds. I use the term we very loosely. People started to call it the Roseland. And it's like, I'm glad, it sounds like we're kind of returning to Roseland. I don't hear that term as often anymore. And for those of you who don't know, the Wild Hundreds refers to like when you're so far south that it's like 101st, 105th, 111th. There was a season when it just became like, you know, they're out in the Wild Hundreds or the Wild Wilds, you know. But I hope we will start to call it Roseland again.
And that's a part of our mission, making sure we hear Roseland like a little bit more positive. Like you hear about Rose Café. My brother has a Roseland AAU team. They're trying to do like a Roseland cigar shop. It's a whole bunch of things that you're about to start hearing, like the name brand.
Yes.
It is transformative. I like how you said that.
I wonder, like, just like going along this same theme, like there are parts of the book where I noticed that you not play to stereotypes, but like stereotypes of people in the projects that, you know, I guess if you didn't grow up there, like things that you would think happen there. And then also things like, and then playing against that with like a lot of joy and like learning about the characters and things you might not think happen, you know, like showing a single mother home and then showing homes with the father present. And I'm just wondering like how you chose like when you would play to that and then versus times when you would push against that.
So Rebecca, you may not like this answer, but I sort of set out to just like lay out kind of a well-rounded picture of what I remember like growing up. So it looks like there were stereotypes, but it was a depiction of all the kind of folks. And I just think that, like, unfortunately, like, I feel like the media, you recognize some people, some tropes, because that's all you see in the media. And I would say, like, those folks exist. And so I really wanted to lay them down in this book. But then I also wanted to show you the part that I never got to read about in the Tribune and the Sun-Times. Like, I'm like, people don't know that folks have birthday parties here. We get dressed up for Halloween. We go to church every week. Like, some people, you know, it's like, there are crackheads, there are winos, you know. I wanted to lay down like a whole well-rounded picture. And so it wasn't even like, I want to make sure I put these stereotypes in here because people will recognize them. I just wanted to like show you all the kind of folks who were living in those buildings like when I was growing up.
So and that both can exist.
Yeah.
I think that's so important.
And coexist.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were some folks like, you know, we call them like winos, like people who were alcoholics. That's the like a proper term. But like, you knew who they were and you called them by name. And there was like a respect there, even though like, you know, you knew they were not living their best lives, but like people live amongst folks who are like struggling with some really heavy things. And I think as you start to read books by people who like grow up in these neighborhoods,
it gets real.
You get the whole picture, right? Yeah.
I took a picture of myself crying because I told Rebecca I can't take this book. Not because it's the story of a lot of us that grow up in these, if it's not the missing father, or if it's not the friends that may try to get you to do things that you might not do, or longing to be accepted, or the crackhead mother, you really did a good job of painting those girls, because like you said, we never see it, and never see it so brutally honest like that. You had made, on page 9, you had said that like all 3 of our buildings could have been 3 different countries. You said that where people spoke their own slang with unique customs led by whichever gang ruled them, but since our families migrated from a small town in Mississippi, so you threw that in, and bringing some superstitions, games, and cheers with them on the Illinois Central trains. We had these common things in our DNA.
Yeah.
Do I have that? Do I have
I bet you do. I bet you do. What is so funny is like, if you talk to a Black Chicagoan long enough, you might have family members who grew up in the same town in Mississippi or Alabama. Like, it wasn't just Mississippi, but I feel like there was like a heavy recruitment for jobs in Chicago. They used the Chicago Defender. And it was like job ads. So folks would come straight from Mississippi to come get this specific job in Chicago. And that's how so many of us have like this connection. Yeah, it is. I think, especially if you talk to any Chicagoans who are African-American specifically, of a certain age, when you start talking about their grandparents, ask them where their grandparents grew up. It's so funny. I was dating this guy who had the same last name as my grandmother's maiden name. And I was like, dude, we need to make sure we're not related because it's real. It is.
I thought about that because even the name, some of the names you use, and I'm just trying to make so many connections. Pearl, because even down on the low end, you know, Pearl's place, was that hers?
No, so when it comes to like naming characters, I think about a specific age group and names that are kind of popular in that age group. And so when I think about like the time period where my grandma was growing up, you know, there were the Lucille's and the Pearls and the Maries. And so I just kind of wanted to be true to that. You know, as a fiction writer, it's my job to make this feel as real as possible so it doesn't snatch you out of the story, so that you're not like, she made that up, you know? So I do my due diligence. Like, I come up with, you know, storylines and things like that, but I still have to kind of like do my research and make things feel appropriate and like it makes sense to you.
One thing I loved is like that it was coming from the perspective of the children, and just how like going back and forth with like their innocence, but then what they were actually experiencing. And one thing that I thought that I like when they're talking about, like, you know, why the Robert Taylor homes were being demolished, is that they're making room for white people. And was thinking about that a lot because it was like the kids' innocence and just like making things so simple, but it's like that's really what was going on, and like everything that was happening like through their eyes like was still happening even though they're kids. Like they, I don't know where my question is getting at this time, but you know, like just the kids witnessing adult things and just trying to make sense of it, I guess.
But it was important for me. Like I remember deciding I was gonna write about these buildings coming down through the eyes of like 12-year-old Black girl, because kids don't have words like gentrification, especially like in the 90s when this was happening. They just know that like they're tearing down our buildings. I'm gonna have to leave my school. I don't know if I'm gonna get to stay, like keep up with my friends. And whether it's a novel or TV shows, how often do you get the perspective of like a little Black girl? Her feelings, her thoughts, her desires. And so I wanted to give you 4 and give them like different perspectives on what's happening and how they were feeling it. You had some of them like, you know, why do we have to leave? And then you had one of them like, let me get out of here. Yeah. So I just think, I think it's so important to like, I really wanted to give these 4 girls a voice. And some of them, like, you know, you don't want your kids acting like Stacia, but I wanted to lay her down in this book so that you got her perspective also.
But not only did you give us 4 girls, you gave us multiple women personalities. You gave us Miss Pierce.
Yeah.
You gave us the woman who had the gun in her bag. You gave us Stacia's mom. You gave us so many representation of women, Black women. And I was going to ask this later, but I just feel compelled because at the end you were saying like when you was giving your mother, the character was giving, Fifi was giving her mother accolades. She was saying like, I don't know what I would have done, you know, without grandma or mama. No way in the book really do we kind of like seem like we miss the father presence. It seems like it's like, you know, they never told me about my dad. Oh well. And then it's like cool. But it never felt like it was something that a little Black girl longed for. And just from my experience, I feel like that is something that we talk about more so than a lot of things. But I didn't get like that father. I didn't get it from her saying like she needed that, like that was something they needed. Like, you know, they needed this, and this. But I don't think they need in the writing world that a father could have, I don't know. Or maybe that just didn't work.
Yeah, but you know, like it's wild that I grew up in a neighborhood where there were so many single women raising families. It was the norm, unfortunately. And when someone did have a 2-parent household, it was like magic. We're like, they're like a mom and a dad, you know? But I just think Fifi is so loved on by her mom, by Miss Pierce, by Mama Pearl, by like everybody. She's curious and she does start to like wonder why she doesn't get to have a dad, but she is so loved and supported that it's not like debilitating to her success. Now, if I stay in the story world and there are other books, who knows as an adult, if like she starts to feel that stronger. But at this one summer in her life, this book it really is just like one summer. And then we do kind of jump to like older Fifi who's narrating the book. But because it's just one summer, like I feel like as a writer, you don't have to do everything. Like, especially if it's like such a small slice of time. I thought it would be important for her to ask the questions and to kind of wonder, because there's at one point when she's like, she wonders if Michi is pretending that Uncle Tim is his dad, you know? So she only has so much access to her brother's internal stuff, you know? But there is that I really wanted to, like, so much of this book is just me sort of taking a lot of my experiences and also looking at like how things ran in the Robert Taylor homes at the time I lived there as a kid, and just kind of like putting that in this story. And so there were so many single women raising families in these buildings, and that was just kind of true to life. And so Yeah, I think Aisha, what you're picking up on is like life has to go on. Like if dads decide to not be around, then these women are like, okay, I've got kids to raise, and
that's important to hear. That's important to hear because we often talk. I'm a teacher, so I often I run into systems like that. And even at basketball games, I heard one of the kids ask like, "Was my daddy in here?" And he like ate, and then like shot. I'm like, God. But then I saw it in your when I saw it, I'm like, dang, what do fathers be? So it was just something I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
In a similar theme, we have a question from the audience that I just wanted to pull forward. Okay. It says, one thing that's sacrificed because the viewpoint of the book is from a kid's perspective is that we don't really know much about the mom's feelings about all the changes happening. She kept her thoughts and plans pretty close to the vest, and I wonder why and what she was thinking. Just curious about your thoughts on mom.
Yeah, I think I made a really conscious choice to keep this story close to the kids. I joke that like I'm about to date myself, but who remembers like Saturday mornings when the Muppet Babies, the cartoon was on? It's like you only saw the parents' legs, like the
or like
whole
Charlie Brown.
About these, yeah, like you felt the parents' presence, but this is not an adult. It's not a story about the adults. It's like the kids. And it was so important for me to like give you a little bit of what the adults were thinking, but it's not their story. And I did try to hint a little bit at like how the adults are handling things. Like you'll see Mama Pearl the day the buildings are coming down. She's kind of staring off in space because like she moved into these buildings like when they opened. And then at the very, very end, I'm trying not to like spoil things for you guys, but at the very, very end, there's a moment where we're not sure if Fifi's mom wants to pay homage to the space where the buildings used to be. And so there are all these tiny moments where I try to like hint at maybe what Fifi saw that her mom might be thinking, but it really is, I just think there's so many books about adults and their thoughts on things. And I really wanted to keep this a child's perspective.
Yeah, and I think along with that, seeing it from the younger sister's perspective of her older brother and what she was trying to make sense of what he was going through. I mean, I think there are even so many stories about that by itself of what he was going through and not from this younger sister's perspective. And I just there's a quote that I pulled out was, when they, again, not to give any spoilers, but when this isn't really a spoiler, I guess, when he said Black kids hadn't started committing crimes would eventually.
Yeah, like the police's perspective that like, I can't catch them on something right now, but they're gonna commit crimes, so I'm gonna take them to jail now. And that was like such an important idea to get into this story, because it has so much to do with what happens to people when you've been accused of doing things or who you're going to be, and then you become that. Like, I think the phrase is manifest destiny. It's like an identity has been placed on you for so long that you're like, well, why not? Like, everybody thinks this is who I'm going to be anyway.
So does that have, when you say that, and just going off affirmations in the stories, I think it was Pearl who told Fifi, like, you gonna be all right, you will make it. And then the brother said, like, I already knew you was gonna be good. Like, those affirmations. And even Miss Pierce, who, you made super a crucial character. That's my question. But when I think about Michi, it was part of there that you had said where Fifi said, like, because mom was there and he was always there. We were here and he was always there. And I'm a mama, right? So when I read that, I read it twice. And I went to myself, I said, come here, come sit in the room. You sit here. You're not gonna be there and I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna miss something. Because it's so important for us not to miss nothing. And I just want you to kind of like talk to us about what you wanted us to get from that.
Yeah, I just think again, it's like Fifi's observations. Like she saw the distance happening. Like when this incident with the police happens, and he comes home, and suddenly he doesn't eat dinner with them. He like chooses to have dinner in his room with the door closed. She's like watching him. Like they go downtown and do touristy things, and he decides to stay home. No.
Would you make
and
him
it's
go?
like,
why do you make him go in the story? Why you should say, get your butt up and come home?
Because it's important for you to notice the incremental moment when a character starts to change. And she noticed that. She's like, this dude is slipping away. Like, we are here and he is there. And she's kind of calling her mom out a little bit, like, why didn't you go get him? Why'd you let him be there? You know, it is like, listen, I wrote it and it's a heartbreaking story. I just think, I think looking at this family,
we needed to hear you say that.
I mean, there were times when I would be revising this book and I would be crying, and I wrote it. So I know there's some heavy stuff. Like for me though, like it was important for me to show you a family and how slowly a family gets ripped apart, and then how they try over the years to come back together. And I just think that's so real, because the other thing that these girls are 12 and they're at the moment right before they decide who they want to be. Yeah. Right. And Fifi's trying her best. She just wants to be a kid. She's like, let's go jump rope. I don't care about what they're doing downstairs. Like, you know, and Precious is all about like church. And Stacia's like, let me in this game. Like, put me on, please. And I just think it was important. It was important to show what free will looks like. Okay. Like these girls get to choose who they want to be. And sometimes you make terrible choices. I'm not a mom, I don't have any kids, but I've worked in a lot of youth programs. I used to be a youth pastor. And I just know that like, you have to let kids, like parents, give your kids all the good stuff you can. And then it gets to an age where they have to take those goods and like make choices. And sometimes they do not make the right choices, but you kind of can't do anything but hope that they come back. And so I just had these girls at this age where like at one moment, they're like, little kids, we jump on rope, we eat candy, right? And the next they're like, I want to be a thug, I want to get baptized. Like just they're making these big decisions about what's happening next. And it's the same with Michi. It's like, I wanted to show you what it's like to be a little Black boy at that time in those buildings. And sometimes choosing to join a gang is a choice to sign up for some protection. And it's like, okay, you could choose this bad choice or this bad choice. Like, which do you think is the less of two evils? And I like, it was so important to write about that, because on the news, you're like, this little boy had a handgun. This little boy, you know, these things happen. And nobody talks about how this little boy had zero other choices, because he lives in a neighborhood where the rules are different from the rest of society. And so if this starts some conversations about how we have checked out on young people, yes, and we don't check back in until they're making terrible decisions and we're putting them in jail, like that's a conversation I would love to have.
That really goes with this another question from the audience. It says, when Fifi was talking about the loving family, Miss Pierce was trying to foster a loving family in the classroom. It says they discussed the practice of bearing emotions. I thought, this is not me talking, this is the person for the question. I thought one of the most impactful parts of the book was seeing the girls growing while experiencing and trying to regulate the trauma. Can you talk about the different types of growth the characters go through? I think that really goes along with what you're discussing.
Yeah, I think they, like the whole span of the book, these kids are kind of growing up and making decisions. And Fifi, of course, is like the most centered. She probably has the least amount of trauma to manage. But when you look at Precious, who decides to lean deeper into church, and you look at Stacia, who decides to join the game, but her tenure as a thug is very short-lived, like very short-lived. I'm talking about a week or two. Like all the things just kind of like fall apart. She don't really get to like have her glory days, right? Even the dynasty that she like is a part of, it just falls apart. Literally, like we're talking about a week or two. But she did. I look at her growth, and when she after all the things happen, she chooses to let her sort of new parents parent her. And I hope people don't miss that, because she could have continued to be rebellious. She could have continued to hate everybody. And so when we do meet her again as an adult, I think there are some people who think that like, oh, she did not make it. But I think you have to pay attention. There is some growth there in this kid. And even like her processing of what happened, like even in that same summer, she is, she regrets some of her decisions. So I'll just say that I do think the characters who get to live long lives, they continue to grow.
Okay. Let me ask you this. What do you mean when you said Black kids, we ain't got the luxury of not knowing what we want to do with our life? And I want you to speak to that because I want everybody to hear it, and I want to repost it. I want to share it because I think that's important when you're thinking about when you're young and you're making a lot of decisions. How you say like Black kids might have the luxury to not know.
Yeah, I just think even if you listen to like news reporting, there will be a 19-year-old. There will be a 19-year-old, and he will be referred to as a teenager. And you will have an actual teenage Black kid called a man when they're reporting like what happened. So even in the way Black kids are sort of aged and adulted earlier, and like also not getting an opportunity to have redemption, right? So I have heard like news stories about white kids, like maybe there's like they were involved in like a robbery, or they like got caught spraying graffiti on the side of a building or something. And when they're in court, it's like, you know what? They're young, they made a poor decision, and they'll be, you know, they have opportunities to like grow. But Black kids, because there is this stigma that like we are destined to like commit crimes and, you know, be a menace to society, if there's a small crime, I just think that like even the judicial system doesn't give them a chance to like to sort of grow from that moment. And instead, there are people in jail for misdemeanor crimes they committed as like a young kid. They're there for like long, like actual sentencing. And so this idea in the book, I think it's Mama Pearl who says it, and it's like this idea that like even at 15 or 16, like sort of being in this like la-di-da state of like, I'll figure it out. It's like not a luxury that Black kids or even like kids of color period get to have. And I saw it growing up too. Like, I think gang recruitment is very different now, but in the 80s and 90s, it was like, if you had made a decision about what you wanted to do and you were kind of focused, like mostly like males, because women weren't sort of chased down and run down to join gangs the way like boys were. And like, if you were like focused, you were like really into school, you're really into basketball, like any of that stuff, it was just this bizarre thing that like gangs would leave them alone. And so I think Mama Pearl is sort of speaking to the idleness. And I won't even like, that sounds negative. I would just say that like, we know that things are not sort of like equal here in our country. And the way that like kids of color are sort of looked at, it's like they got to come out the gate like being ready and thinking about their plan, like having a plan. And even then, like there's still like no guarantees about anything. But I think I just really wanted to kind of like have this older, wiser character kind of speak to that. Like things aren't the same, and you can't get into all this like tomfoolery and think that like you will have other opportunities, because redemption is not dished out to us in the same way.
Loud and clear.
Yeah.
So do you have one? Because we can talk about sheeping, because I never heard that word sheeping before. And
I made it up.
I just knew that was a term, like when you least compliant. I'm like, oh, okay, and sheeping too.
Well, let me tell you something. Fiction writers, that's why I never, like, there are folks who write nonfiction. I'm like, why? You gotta like prove things, research everything. Fiction is my jam because you literally get to make things up. I make up words. I just give them the characters, you know.
So, like, I ain't never heard that term, or least compliant.
But it's the kind of, well, least compliant is like an actual term. Like you can look that up. You'll find it in like CHA documents and stuff. But I thought about my grandmother, and like, I swear my grandma used to make up words. And so I'm like, a woman of this specific age, I think she would come up with a word like sheeping.
It makes sense. It flowed, but I don't have to ask you about it.
It's a new verb.
It is. It is.
No, I was gonna say, I think to respect everyone's time, we could talk about this.
That's why you being quiet. Oh,
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I could keep talking about this for forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have a part two.
Okay, so give me one more, and I'm gonna leave you alone.
Okay.
You have to talk to us about when you and Precious was in the sanctuary. Like, what happened? What do you want readers to get out of walking into spaces like that? You know, because you did also say that you were a Bible youth leader, so I know that's in you, right? And you said the words like awareness, and that's like you friends, like you saw good in people. Your brother highlighted you on that, because I think it's very important that we have good people out here that see good in people. Yeah. And does it come from that place in a sanctuary sometimes, or is
So we're talking about like two, like there is some overlap, but like when I was Fifi's age, I was not in church like that, period. I have friends who, like my best friend was a Jehovah's Witness, and so they went to Kingdom Hall, and of course, like I had no idea what they did at the Kingdom Hall. But in this story, like Fifi is sort of introduced to Christianity from her friend Precious, and we hear words like sanctuary all the time, but it actually is a biblical term. And it kind of refers to, in the book, on a very basic level, it refers to like a place where people feel safe. And I just think like there's such a dramatic difference between what it was like being on the block with like all the music and all the voices and all the cars going down the street. And then you walk into a church and it's quiet. And the spiritual practice of like praying or just being quiet, this was like new to Fifi. Like she's just like, I feel safe here. It's kind of nice to be in quiet. I really, like, she took that away being like, you know, I want to have this quiet more often in my daily life, which again is like, it's like a spiritual practice of like, you know, there's stuff like meditation. We have all these different, like so many different religions and how they do it. But essentially what we're all looking for is like some quiet to like hear from God, some quiet to like come away from like the busy of our lives. And so I just wanted to give this to these kids. Like it's unusual that 12-year-olds would have such strong spiritual lives. But again, we're talking about fiction. I can do what I want. So I just thought it was really cool to kind of like break it down. This very basic. Again, when you give it to like some 12-year-olds, it's going to be really easy to digest for everybody. So yeah, she just like, she finds this sanctuary and then she wants to like give it to her brother. She wants to give it to Tanya. And she wants God to like, she's hearing all these things and she's just like, you know, God's going to bless them too. Cause I'm asking him, because God said, asking you shall receive. And just like in her mind, it's like God is like a genie. And she gets all this good stuff from being in like a spiritual community. And it changes her. And I think just like as she grows, she gets to fine tune that. But yeah, like I think she finds a quiet, safe place that gives her like a break and some strength to go back to her like crazy neighborhood.
I think that's very important for kids to hear, and especially like, you know, in a book of such, you know, because it's painted a really good picture, but then also to know that you can find a safe space. It's important for our youth. And I do want to respect everybody's time, so I could talk to you for days. I love your book. I do. Apologize for being late, but I do want to kind of talk about this that Rose Cafe got coming up.
We did, Aisha.
Okay. So everybody know about the Peace Walk.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Rose. Okay, so it's something that we want to highlight. This is our 3rd year doing it, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. And I love the impact that we're having on the community. So if anybody can join us to support.
Thank you guys for all that you're doing, and thank you for like carving out a safe space with books in our city and on the South Side. And I'm really hoping that like when people throw this term South Side around, it's like such an all-encompassing, sweeping phrase. Like I'm like, South Side when, South Side where, but I'm hoping that they'll start thinking about things like, hey, do you know that there's a bookstore, there's a cigar shop, that they're doing all these things in Roseland? So that will definitely be my prayer, and we will have a long-standing relationship throughout my writing career too. So I'm not going anywhere.
Don't go nowhere. We need your book. It's timely, and I appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I like my kids out.
Thanks, everybody. I saw. That's all right. They'll appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.